All right. Hello, everyone. For those of you who haven't met me yet, my name is Paul with the Land Trust. Joined here by our four guests. We have Jill, Gina, Stephanie, and Griffin. They are all here as professional environmental educators who I have worked with in the past as part of my graduate school studies. And they're here today to share a little bit more about their work with iNaturalist and similar types of citizen or participatory science programming. This is something we've been trying to do a lot more with here at the Land Trust, and has brought these folks on to help share more about how they're doing it in their more established programs, to kind of give us some insight into how it might be useful for our end of things. I will be recording this session, so you'll be able to watch it again. You come back to refer to it at any time or share it with anyone else. We'll try to have a little bit of time for questions at the end. I do have a pretty hard out at 5 o'clock, so we won't be able to go very far past that time. So by like 4:45 or so is when I'm aiming to have our discussion wrapped up and open it up to any audience questions that we might have. Just to get things started, I'm going to go over a brief overview of iNaturalist, just in case anyone is not familiar with it already. It's not going to be a full deep dive into how to use iNaturalist, but just a brief overview to make sure everyone has the basic context of what we're talking about. And then I'll go into some of the more discussion questions for our panel here to share more about their use of citizen science and iNaturalist in their work. For those who are not aware already, iNaturalist is a citizen science program that allows users all across the world to share their observations of biodiversity, whether it's plants, animals, fungi, or any other form of life that might be out there. All you need to do is you take a picture or some other form of evidence of a species that you've seen out in the wild. It could be a photo, it could be a video. We've even started doing audio recordings here the past year or so with iNaturalist. So you take that evidence and you add it to the iNaturalist website, either the website itself or they have an app as well. You upload your evidence, and then the iNaturalist will offer suggestions for what that species is based on image recognition or again, like audio recognition. You can then put in your observation based on what you believe it is, where you saw it, and when you saw it, and then add it to this iNaturalist network. Once it's added, it gets added to this whole global database that other researchers and other iNaturalist users can see your observations. They can then comment on them to try to help identify exactly what it is you saw. And then researchers are able to use those observations as well for their data purposes. We have a page on iNaturalist as well for the Land Trust that automatically collects all observations made on any of our public preserves. So any of the sites that NULT owns and manages directly. So on this page, you can see any of the observations that people are seeing on any of our different preserves. You can even see where they're located. You can see here, you've got some hot spots in some of our different preserve areas. You can see when they've been seen, see who saw them, and try to help comment on them as well to help confirm what species are being seen or help correct any observations that might be misidentified. Oh, we have one person who is joining. So that's just a brief overview of what iNaturalist is. We've been using it in a lot of our different Land Trust programs over the past year or so. If you've been to any of our bio blitzes, you might have seen some posts about it on social media. And we're looking to try to increase that more over the coming year, try to offer more opportunities for community groups and for our members to engage with this type of scientific programming. Help not only our work at the Land Trust for managing our preserves, but to try to create new engagement opportunities for people as well. Just to help kind of offer some additional insights, some additional ways that we might not have considered being able to use iNaturalist, we invited our friends here to help answer some questions about their work, tell us a little bit more about how they've used iNaturalist. A lot of their work has helped inform why I make use of iNaturalist here. So they've got some different insights that they're going to share with us. And as we go, you'll get to hear more about, how they work, what sort of settings they work in as well. The first question for you all is if you could any of you can make a bit of an overview of how you make use of iNaturalist or similar types of citizen science projects in your work. We'll start with Griffin, because I know Griffin uses it a lot in his work. So Griffin, if you could just give a brief overview of where you work, what you do, and how iNaturalist fits into it. We'll start with you and then work our way around the group.
Yeah. Hi, folks. Can you all hear me okay? Perfect. Yeah, so my name is Griffin Bray. I am an extension educator with the Minnesota Master Naturalist program. So if you've heard of the Wisconsin Master Naturalist program, it's just like that, but in Minnesota. And we use iNaturalist extensively with our Minnesota Master Naturalist volunteers. So every volunteer needs to get 40 hours of volunteer service a year, and that can include contributing to citizen science projects like iNaturalist. So certain iNaturalist projects documenting the biodiversity of Minnesota, like we have one on lichens, or we have ones on different species of reptiles and amphibians or different plants, some looking at invasive species. These are all projects on iNaturalist that our volunteers can contribute to, get their volunteer hours, and also contribute to our scientific understanding of Minnesota and how species are changing, how their presence and prevalence in different areas. And we also use it heavily during the Master Naturalist courses. So even people who aren't familiar with iNaturalist, by the end of our Master Naturalist core courses, they are pretty well familiar with it. Many of them go on to submit thousands of observations and honestly contribute quite a lot to the Minnesota, to our understanding of Minnesota's biological diversity. We also do City Nature Challenge. I think we might talk a little bit about that later, which is international too, so broadly applicable for the Master Naturalist program.
All right, Stephanie, how about you next? You are muted. Had to be someone.
Yes. How long has it been that we've been using Zoom and I still do that?
You know, it happens.
Hi. So my name's Stephanie. I work with Cornell Lab of Ornithology in Ithaca, New York. I am the program assistant for the K-12 education department. And so what we do is we create resources and deliver trainings to educators, both formal and non-formal, on 3 basic pillars, which are nature, participatory, or citizen science. We now call it participatory science at the lab, but it's the same thing, and inquiry. So what we use, not necessarily iNaturalist, because Cornell Lab has its own apps of citizen science. So we have eBird and Merlin, and those are our main ones. But I personally have used iNaturalist. I think last time was with you, Paul, when we did the BioBlitz at SWES, probably. But iNaturalist also has the equivalent of that we have. Well, we have Merlin to ID birds, and eBird to log the data. I use Seek more, I guess, to identify the plants sometimes when I'm walking around. But we use the citizen science platforms to engage students in helping them not only connect to the natural world, but also to foster an interest in science, basically. Yeah.
All right. Pass it on to Gina. How about?
Hello, I'm Gina Patton, and I am the Education Outreach Coordinator for Balsam Mountain Trust in Western North Carolina. We are a land preserve and land trust. We're a private preserve that's also partially developed, so that's kind of weird. We own 4,000 acres, and 1,000 of that is under development, residential development, and the other 3,000 is in a land conservation trust, so can't be developed. We use iNaturalist in a couple ways. One is we have something called Balsam Backyard, which is a location project on iNaturalist for all of our residents. So they can, when they're walking around the preserve or hiking or walking their dog, they can take pictures of things and post, and it automatically goes there because of their location. And so we can keep an eye on what people are seeing. If they're seeing invasive species, that can help us decide, oh, we need to do some work on invasive species along that trail. If they see rare or threatened species, then we can kind of know where those are located, which is useful for us. We do have to be a little bit careful. We have 3 natural heritage areas on our preserve that contain plants that are popularly poached in this area. So there is a way on iNaturalist that you can hide locations of things. So you can still post it to iNaturalist, but not reveal the location. So for certain plants like our ginseng and our golden seal, we ask our residents or people using iNaturalist to hide the location because we do get poachers that come on the land and we don't want them to know where our valuable plants are. So that's one way that we use it. We also participate. I personally lead a lot of the iNaturalist myco blitzes or bio blitzes on the preserve. So iNaturalist has lots of projects. You can create your own, or they have some that they do regularly, like the City Nature Challenge. They also have a international myco blitz for fungi twice a year, usually in April and then in the fall. And we always participate in that. And so those are fun for our residents to use. Or I sometimes will do a myco-blitz in the local public park and invite the public to come. And then I teach them how to use iNaturalist and to record their sightings during the myco-blitz. And so, yeah, the cool thing is that, once your identification, once you put it on iNaturalist and it gets confirmed by other people, it becomes what's called research grade. And that means that researchers are confident enough in the idea of that researchers can use that to find out where a certain species is in an area, or where people are seeing something, or that kind of thing. So iNaturalist is actually used, their data is actually used by researchers, which is kind of cool. So, yep.
All right. And Jill, if you can give a brief overview of your position, and I know you don't use iNaturalist as much in your current role, but just give us a brief overview of what you do, why you do it.
Hi everyone, my name is Jill and I'm a program coordinator with Teton Science School, specializing in youth groups. I'm based in Jackson, Wyoming. We're the education partner of Grand Teton National Park. I largely work with school groups, and we actually, to minimize the technology distraction, we take away kids' phones when they come on our field trips for the week. So you need a smartphone to use iNaturalist, or I mean, you can use a computer, but we're more outdoors time. But a way that I thought about how we do use it is our educators and our instructors using it as an identification tool for if a kid asks a question about something that they're looking at, or with our Road Scholar programs where we take more of a tour guide role. That's another way to say, like, I don't know, but let's look into this and find this out. So I would say that we use it as an identification tool. And then to tack on to what Gina was saying about being used for research material in my personal life, but also in work with just general IDing things. Very often when I'm just using it for the selfish reason of I want to know what it is, I suddenly get a notification that blah, 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 put it in their study. And I'm like, okay, cool. I contributed to a study with zero effort. And that's a fun thing that can happen.
All right. Thank you, Jill. I do not get notifications about people using my observations for research studies, so I should probably check on that. Or your observations are just better than mine. That could be it too. Going to go back around to Griffin and then work back through everyone for my next question. So we've all, everyone here has been through graduate school for environmental education, has a lot of experience in conducting these types of programs to connect people with the outdoor environment. I was wondering if any of you could go through and offer some of your suggestions, thoughts, ideas for how iNaturalist or similar types of participatory or citizen science engagement can best be, structured and provided to engage people with conservation. We'll start with Griffin, if you got anything.
Yeah, so iNaturalist is an excellent tool for capitalizing on people's natural curiosity about the natural world. And it's something that, if you have a phone or a tablet, you can even hand that to a child and they can make their own observations. They all often they'll, see something, they'll want to know what it is. iNaturalist and its companion app Seek will help you do that. So they can take a photo of it, they can look at what people have to say about it, and they can also submit it. So they can directly contribute to that scientific or to the scientific community by getting their observation out there and hopefully getting it to research grade, like Gina and Jill and Paul have been talking about. So I don't work as much with children anymore, but adults also really like using iNaturalist. In fact, they kind of turn it into a competition. So it is an excellent way to bring a little bit of fun competition in there. Like I said, we use it in our Master Naturalist courses. Currently in the course we have going on right now, one individual alone has over 500 observations of 245 species, and the entire class has well over 1,500 observations. So in just a couple of weeks that we've been doing that, we have collected a lot of that. About 60% of those observations are research grade. So people from the university or from other universities or just interested citizens can go and look at what's in their areas. And it's, really easy. So even if you're just leading a public nature program, you find some interesting plant or animal or anything out there, you can take a picture. You can have your group take photos as they go along of things that they find interesting or think are unique. And they're having fun, they're learning things out of it, and they're contributing to our understanding of the natural world. I think that answers your question, Paul. It was a big question.
Well, did have a lot of components, but that is good. I will say, speaking of the competition aspect, if you go to our iNaturalist page, I'm going to pull it back up here. We do, in fact, have a leaderboard for who has the most observations on any of our preserves. Now, Matt227 is actually on this call, so good job, Matt. You are still in the lead by a very significant margin. But you could try to beat Matt. Anyone could go out there and just try to get that #1 spot if they so chose. So you have the option, and we could do something with that if we, want to at some point, which maybe we will once I'm back in the lead, and then we'll crown the leader. All right, next we're going to pass it on over to Stephanie for your, insight onto conducting citizen participatory science programming in education engagement settings, which is actually pretty much what Stephanie wrote her whole entire thesis about.
Not quite.
Sort of.
Yeah,
adjacently.
Yeah. I was just working on the citizen science projects around Wisconsin, right? See what they were doing around. I can give you a whole list of those, or you just got to look at my thesis. That's it.
Perfect.
So I focus on the teachers, right, and getting teachers connected to citizen science. So the benefits with I guess our benefits. There's so many thoughts in my head. Sorry, new mom here.
Oh, no worries.
What we try to tell the teachers is that by using citizen science, whether it's, I mentioned eBird and Merlin, but there are many more projects that we can use in iNaturalist as well, that it's a great way to engage students with. So even though sometimes you can't use technology, sometimes you can, depending on your classroom. But even if you can't use technology, you can still go do the observations, go outside, and then put it on the website. The teacher can do the uploading of the data, right? That then goes to the researchers. But the main, I'm so sorry. I am just like all over the place here.
No worries, you're good.
What we do at the lab, we use it to connect. I guess that's what we're trying to do more, is to connect the educators with the community and the communities, and to help us solve real world problems. So that all that data, you said that's research grade data, we have it as well through the eBird, and you can actually tell the students what you're collecting is going to actually be used for something meaningful. Conservation action will come from what you're collecting. So anything from studying habitat loss, pollution, disease, climate change effects, environmental changes, all that, bird migration, nesting successes, changes in populations through time, all of that is actually help. All the insights that are provided by the observations through all these different apps help inform the conservation plans and to help develop key actions to protect those birds and habitats, or animals and habitats. The great thing is, if you use other platforms like Sooniversity, you can go from the micro scale to macro scale. It can be local and global, like you've been mentioning, right? It can go from online only to in person, right? You can go, it's just, there's so much potential with the different projects. You've already kind of talked about, like, invasive species was mentioned, right? There's a lot that you can ID through these apps, and yeah. Give me a more specific question later.
No, you're good. That was good. Yeah, definitely lots of options for connecting, engagement with these real world opportunities to make it a bit more applicable than just learning things in isolation.
Yeah.
Gina,
we do have. Go ahead.
Okay, Gina, we'll pass it on to you. How about, any of your tips, recommendations for incorporating this sort of stuff into education or engagement kind of the how and the why.
Yeah, so I would not underestimate what Griffin mentioned about the power of competition. I know that's a thing on our preserve. People go look at the leaderboard and are like, oh, I need, I'm ahead now or whatever. Personally, I love it. This generation coming up is used to what I call gamification, which is the idea that you make education a game. And so iNaturalist can be used for gamification to, oh, I'm competing and, kind of like Pokemon, I'm collecting all the species or whatever. So that's kind of a cool way to get really young people involved, or, people who grew up playing Pokemon. What I love is a lot of the challenges like the City Nature Challenge, or during Moth Week in July, there's a moth challenge, is that if you do really well, you can get really cool badges or stickers. This is my Moth Week sticker, or my Moth Week badge, which actually glows in the dark.
What?
And this is my City Nature Challenge badge from last City Nature Challenge. So that's kind of cool. I like that personally.
Didn't know it would glow in the dark.
Yeah, I know.
That is so cool.
I love to use it when I do interpretive hikes, because even though I go ahead and I know a lot of plants and I scope out my hike, there's always going to be something that somebody points out and says, what's that? And I won't instantly know what that is. And so that's an opportunity for me to say, hey, I don't know, let's take a couple pictures of that, put it into iNaturalist, see what they say. Now, you don't always get an accurate identification on iNaturalist right away, and that's okay too, because then you can explain to people that that is part of the scientific process, is not always knowing what something is and having to cross-check it against other things and wait and see what people say it is, and maybe go home and look it up in an ID book and see if it's close to what iNaturalist is guessing. Because I also do always talk to people about the fact that apps are not perfect and AI is very fallible, and you should not trust a mushroom that you're going to eat based on what iNaturalist says. So we talk a lot about that, about always being careful what an ID says and not making bad decisions based on one guess at what something is. But I do think it's a really cool tool, particularly because people carry around their phones everywhere they go. And so when they see something they don't know, now there's this opportunity for them to get more information about it just by taking a picture of it. So yeah, I think there are lots and lots of ways to engage people in this.
All right, Jill, we'll pass it on to you. If you could talk about the macro lenses here during your little segment, that would be nifty, because for those of you who don't know, we wrote a grant last year to get a set of macro lenses that you could attach to your phone cameras, take good pictures of really close-up things. So I bring those to all of our iNaturalist events. And Jill's research for her thesis was one of the big reasons why I actually wrote the grant, to get those. So Jill, if you could maybe talk a little bit about that and any other tips for engagement you might have.
Sure, I can start with the macro lens point. So yes, everything that Paul said is true. I'll add that iNaturalist has a feature you can, instead of, if you're trying to identify something or upload something to the server, you don't have to just use one image. You can use multiple images. So I think macro lenses can be a really fantastic tool for, you definitely want big picture, just taking pictures of the plant as well. But if you take some closer up pictures of what you're looking at and wanting to identify and add to your database, that can add to getting a more exact identification for databases, as the more information that is known, the better. And I'll also add to what Paul was saying about my research with my thesis, is people, adults and kids alike, they enjoy having a fun, nifty tool to attach to their phone, or a camera that enhances and is different than their everyday life. So by having that macro lens tool and attaching it to phones, that adds in a level of fun and curiosity to land trust programs happening that can be a heightened level of engagement with interacting with nature that is with the land trust. And then I thought about a couple other ideas, just thinking about land trust context and being Paul's friend and what I know about his job. One of the main things that I thought about was thinking about the power of partnerships, and I'm sure the Land Trust is interested in that. I recently went to the Utah Museum of Natural History, and they have a big sign about iNaturalist, and where all their gardens surrounding, like if you want to take pictures and identify things. So I think it would be a really good partnership community between the Land Trust and some of the museums in the Appleton and central Wisconsin area for doing some bio blitzes and things of that sort relating to iNaturalist. I know there's a couple children's museums. I think there's a science discovery center, something about paper. And
There
I know it's in a
was.
different place, but
It might be
in
shutting down,
Wausau-
I've heard.
What?
I just actually heard today that I think the Paper Science Center is shutting down. I'm not
Okay,
totally
well,
sure.
maybe not them.
Maybe
We
not
want a
them.
strong partnership,
Yeah.
not a weak one.
Yeah.
Wausau has a great botanical garden. They could be great to collaborate with as well. So just partnership with museums. Something else that I thought about, another partnership could be Wisconsin also has a Master Naturalist program, and Master Naturalist programs in all states are always trying to look for ways for participants to like network and know each other in real time. So the Land Trust could like host and partner with Wisconsin Master Naturalist and do like a meetup on one of the conservation easement Land Trust lands to like be part of bonding iNaturalist nerd people. And then the last thing that I thought of was just thinking about, I'm sure as a land trust, you want to have like a fancy end of year report and things of that sort. And what are some accomplishments that have been happening by the land trust? And I know that with a personal profile, you can, at the end of the year / in general, you can get like a report of like all the various things that you've identified and things of that sort. I think kind of what I'm referencing is like that homepage that Paul was sharing. So I just think that iNaturalist data collected by various participants on the various reserves, preserves, whatever you call your different land, can be used as an accomplishment report kind of material for what kind of engagement has been happening on the land that the Land Trust partners with.
All right. Thank you, Jill. My next question, this one might not be as applicable to all of you. So this, whoever has a good answer for it, Stephanie, I know you will probably have a good answer. But my question is kind of on the other end, talk some about how this sort of thing can be engaging for people who participate in it, looking more on the other end of how it's useful for researchers who make use of this sort of data for either land management, other forms of conservation research. I'm going to start with Stephanie, just because I know you work with the Cornell lab and are probably the most connected with researchers making use of citizen science data. But then we'll go around to anyone else as well to see if anyone else has any particularly relevant insight to share while we've got enough time left.
Yeah, before I go into that, since Jill was thinking about talking about partnerships and stuff, we do have a program at Cornell Lab. I just linked it in the chat. It's called the Land Trust Bird Conservation Initiative. We do give mini grants, mini by being 10,000 to 25,000 dollar grants that can be applied all over the country. So feel free to look into it and apply. I think they just gave out the 2024 ones, but there's an opening in January, I think, for the next ones. So take a look at that because yeah, networking is great and partnering up. Repeat the question again. Sorry.
Oh yeah.
My
Sorry, you were
brain
talking
is-
about giving us money, so that's important too. But the question was kind of how to, on your end of working with researchers and research groups that make use of this sort of participatory science data, how is that sort of data useful for researchers to, inform their decisions and things?
Yeah, no, it is incredibly useful. So we have staff, postdocs, using the data that we collect from our participatory science programs, and we have databases for decades, going over decades in some certain projects. But they use them to answer scientific questions. They use the data, they analyze the data, and then they come up with new questions that they can answer. So there's new projects popping up, new scientists coming to the lab. We work with people from all over the world. They are, because the data that is collected can be collected all over. It's actually in every single country. There's over 1.7 billion observations in our eBird database. And like I said, so our mission right now is to lower the curve of biodiversity loss. And this is the way that citizen science is the way that we're doing it. I mentioned before that some of the projects like focus on habitat loss and the bird migration, the nesting success. I mean, do you have nest boxes and stuff like that there that you use already?
Not on any of our preserves at the moment. I don't think there are any at Weeklyok. So, I'm not none that I am aware of it currently. It's something I've definitely considered trying to, implement more of that, habitat management aspects on our preserves. Just haven't
Yeah,
quite gotten
because
to it yet, but someday.
okay, so yeah, that's a great option also, not just like observation ones, but like nest. I mean, it's an observation. Project Nest Watch, Project Feeder Watch. Do you have? I'm assuming you have. Do you have a building, main visitor
We
center
have an
style building?
office complex. It's not like an actual center on any of our preserves, though.
Okay. Well, you don't need. Yeah. I mean, if they are, yeah, if you have, you can start small
Yeah.
outside the office there with for watching feeders and getting volunteers from the different land. Yeah. No, there's a lot of conservation plans can be formed and key actions can be created from data that you obtain on these. So yeah, no. Any questions on that? I don't know.
I think Gina, also, I was thinking from a land management side of things, I was wondering if your team there uses the iNaturalist data or other sorts of citizen science data collected to inform the management of your preserve.
Yeah, so a couple things. One is, since I've been on the preserve, we've been trying to keep some different species lists of, I mean, that goes back to something I think that Jill said about end of year reports and being able to report on your preserve and what kind of things you have on your land and that you're caring for. And so I've been doing a fungi list since I started at the trust and the nice thing about iNaturalist is it also will GPS pin where you see different things when you take the pictures. So you can know, is a fungi or mushroom coming back over and over again in the same spot? Is it not? So we're just trying to get a list so that at the end of the year, we can say things like, we found 300 different species of mushrooms this year on the preserve, that kind of thing, that we have this many endangered or threatened species that we know we've identified on the preserve. So that's really useful. We have many, many colleges and universities around our preserve that use us as a research site because we are a closed private preserve. So they can come on and kind of know that things aren't going to get disturbed by the public when they do. So we've had everything from trillium studies to, we just had a whole entire natural resources capstone class come do a whole semester of a land management assessment of our property. And, they can use iNaturalist to take pictures of things, to look at past data from our Balsam backyard of, okay, here was a bad spot where we kept getting reports of invasive species, or here's a place where there's a lot of threatened species that, we need to be aware of. So we've definitely had researchers who come on the land use iNaturalist as a tool for sure to locate things or to designate areas that need more protection. So we definitely have that going on as far as utilizing that information for research.
I have one final thing I want to make sure we talk about before I open it up for questions. This April is something that I know Griffin will be doing with his group in Minnesota, because we were on a meeting for it together and talked about it a little bit more. But this City Nature Challenge, I'm just going to talk a little bit about it, and Griffin, I'm going to make you talk more about it. But basically, City Nature Challenge is an annual kind of global collaboration, global event in the last weekend of April, there we go. So that last weekend of April is a time when groups around the world in cities being any sort of designated region, not even necessarily just a specific city, you could say, but they work together to encourage iNaturalist or other forms of biodiversity monitoring in urban areas, just trying to encourage people to get out and about, explore those city parks, explore other areas in the city, surrounding regions, basically trying to mobilize people to collect data about biodiversity in these different cities and other regions. So it is something that we have not done before. It hasn't really been done before in Wisconsin much at all, but we are trying to help promote that here in Northeast Wisconsin. I was in a meeting yesterday with some folks up in Brown County. So we're going to be trying to get that coordinated and then start promoting it to other groups in the area as well to get groups participating in these types of events, whether it's, some trainings beforehand, events during the weekend, some follow-up events to identify these observations. So we're trying to make it kind of a big deal here in Northeast Wisconsin. This actually is the same weekend as the Green Bay Packers hosting the NFL draft. So we're going to have a lot of attention up here in the Northeast Wisconsin area. And we're going to try to use this as a way to show people that we've got more than just the Packers up in the area. So this is going to be new for us, new for our region. But I know Griffin is part with the Minnesota Master Naturalist program, is helping to coordinate some of that over on his end. And they have more experience coordinating it than us. So I'm going to turn over to Griffin to tell us a little bit more about, what he's looking to do with the program, what your group is looking to do. And then if anyone else has participated as well, we'll get your input.
Yeah, so the Minnesota Master Naturalist program has participated in the City Nature Challenge for several years now. Last year alone, we had over 5,000 observations from the 7-county Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. And most of those are, again, research-grade observations, so they can be used directly for citizen science for research purposes. Also, just to briefly mention the Minnesota Master Naturalist program, we are part of the University of Minnesota, and a lot of the programs at the University of Minnesota will use iNaturalist data and other citizen science project data as part of their official research that'll get published and distributed to the scientific community. Yeah, City Nature Challenge is a large event for us. We generally have multiple events with multiple partner organizations all around the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area, where we'll take people out. We will teach them how to use iNaturalist if they don't already know. We'll host bio blitzes and other parties where you collect as many observations as you can. And then we'll also, during the following week, when it's identification and upload time, we'll have identification parties where we get our master naturalists together and they help to identify all of the observations they can, get them to as high of a classification as they can, and make sure that we get as many research grade observations, correctly research grade observations, as we can. Because we're contributing to an international effort at this point, and it does make a difference.
All right. Is anyone else here? I know, Gina, you got a patch apparently from City Nature Challenge. I didn't know they offered patches.
So this was the first year that, so Western North Carolina, because we don't have any big cities, and City Nature Challenge started as a sort of city against city competition, I guess. We got designated a few years ago, the Western North Carolina is considered a city. So we're our own city because we just have little towns everywhere. But last year was the first year that we really promoted it and really pushed it, like at the preserve and for our residents, and encouraged people to participate. And then the staff we kind of competed against each other because, yeah, that's fun. And I really enjoyed it. It gives you a concentrated amount of time to look for specific things. Like with City Nature Challenge, it's all your observations. Then there are other things like that moth week I talked about, where it's just an emphasis on how many moth species you can find. And so it's kind of cool because it's like this spurt of activity to do on iNaturalist and see how many species you can see in a given amount of time. But we really enjoy it, and we're gonna keep promoting it as a yearly event on the preserve, and see what we can get as far as observations go. So, and then the badges are just, a bonus thing that you can get just to be like, woohoo, I did it, put it on your hat.
All right. Jill and Stephanie, do either of you have anything to add pertaining to City Nature Challenge in particular? All right. I didn't think you would. That is, knew Griffin did because I saw him on that meeting that one time. All right, so that is about the time I was looking to try to start shifting things over to audience questions. So I'll open up to any of our audience members if you all have any questions you'd like to ask, our panel or me.
Matt, I think you would like a badge, especially with how many observations you have.
Yeah,
going
we could get
on.
we
I
could
know
get
you
Matt a
want to
special
show it off,
badge.
and you're just keeping that in.
We could make like a special top land trust observer badge just for you, Matt.
Mm-hmm. I have a quick comment.
A comment, yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I don't know the exact history of how long iNaturalist has been around, but I know it's been around for quite a while. And I just want to say that in the past couple of years, it has extremely skyrocketed in popularity. Like, this app is huge. It's used around the world, so many bio blitzes, so many ways of engaging different people. I would even argue that there's like it's like the nerdiest, most niche thing, but like iNaturalist celebrities of sorts now, like people who are like the top mycologist with like blah 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 thousands and thousands of observations, and it's like a big accomplishment. I just want to stress that iNaturalist is like a huge thing that is really widely known. It would be a very effective and known modern day tool for the land trust to be using, and also just a really good tool in general for connecting people to nature nowadays. I'm sure we're all familiar with the disconnect between nature and the digital world. So especially with young people, it can be a way to combine the two, with iNaturalist being a digital thing, and then, you know, the actual looking at nature coming together as well. And then for other populations as well, it can be a new way to tap into like how technology can also actually be really helpful and useful to science and observation.
Yeah, thank you, Jill.
I'm just going to add really quickly what Jill said. I went on a birding tour in in Panama, and our local birding tour guide got hired as a tour guide because he had made so many observations on iNaturalist in Panama that they sought him out. He was like way up on the leaderboard, and they're like, this guy needs to become a bird tour guide. And that's how he got his job, was from all his iNaturalist observations. So could be a career move too.
Responding to Matt's question, I saw, I know on some of our preserves, Matt asked in the chat a question about getting GPS signals on the land trust sites. I know some of them are better than others. Some of them, our preserves are in more remote areas, so signal's not as great. Normally, if I, can't get signal to upload observations right when I'm out there, I can still take the photo and then upload it once I get back to somewhere where there is signal. Normally, if I've got my phone set up so it automatically records the location of any picture I take, so that's tended to work for me. Beyond that, I guess it depends partly on your phone if it is able to record GPS accurately or not with the amount of signal you have. But I know some definitely are not ideal for that, but normally I haven't had any significant problems with it.
Yeah, I just wanted to second what Paul was saying. I live in the Western US and just notoriously like I recreate where there's no cell service. And with iNaturalist, you can take a picture, have it still do the GPS even with no cell service. And then it kind of does that fancy technology thing of just sitting there. And then when I get to cell service or internet, I open iNaturalist again, and then the little loading bar will go uploading, and then it will go on iNaturalist.
Yeah, and just kind of to address that too, if like you can actually take photos with a regular camera and upload those to iNaturalist. So if you don't have GPS signal, even if you just write down the location, you can modify it later to get as exact as you would like.
We had another good question. Oh, sorry, Stephanie was saying something.
Oh no, I saw it, so I was gonna go for it.
Oh, go for it.
But with Seek, it's more like an identification app. You take the photo to see what you're looking at, and iNaturalist is like the citizen science project where you log the sightings of all the observations that you see. They work together great. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, you probably know about this, but I think Seek and iNaturalist are both made by the same software company. And Seek was later on done by iNaturalist because they wanted to kind of try to do like a niche identification thing. But iNaturalist is the parent umbrella grandmother organization, and then Seek is smaller, more niche kind of application.
Yeah, I think Seek in particular was designed to not be kind of designed for younger audiences. To, you could have your kids create an account on Seek because it doesn't actually share anything with, a global network of people. But now just you post something and then it adds it to this whole, global database. So it's basically sharing information with, outside people, not like any detailed information, but still enough that you might not necessarily want your young kids having access to it. So it's designed to be a way of, it just looks at a, image or what is something you're seeing and it helps you identify it, but doesn't share it out anywhere. So that way you can be younger than 13 and create an account on Seek, or you can just use it as a simpler way of looking at something if you don't want to add it out to, you know, the global iNaturalist network. All right, do we have any other questions or any final comments from our panelists? Oh, what are some of the challenges of doing BioBlitz? So definitely one of the challenges I've encountered is just making sure, you know, figuring out, you know, location-wise, finding a good location that people want to go to, it's accessible but has enough natural stuff. Then figuring out, you know, the routes you want to take in the location, making sure you hit the hot spots of where there are interesting things, but also not taking people on too long of a route to get any of those places. So some, you know, you might not have to be able to get to an ideal location, but it's easier to access, things of that sort. Or just sometimes also being able to get people, you know, first of all, interested in it, to know that, hey, this is actually something I can do. Most people will see, oh, this event for identifying species and things, and think, oh, I don't know how to identify species. I can't do this sort of event. So you want to make it clear that, hey, yes, this is actually something you can do because it's designed to be accessible to everyone. Making sure that people know that, and making sure that you actually are able to follow through on that once you get to the event. Those are some of the couple challenges I've encountered. I don't know if anyone else has things to share.
The main challenge that I think of when I just think about BioBlitz is like, I'm a nature nerd. I like observing nature. I think it's cool. But if I'm just a normal person who exists in society around Appleton, Wisconsin, why should I come to a BioBlitz? What makes it cool? What is really the appeal for me to be coming and doing this and helping the land trust? Is it going to be fun? Am I going to be bored? Like, what on earth is this? So I would say that like a challenge can be marketing and talking about like the value of it and like the outcomes that can come of it. And I can also think of it could be beneficial to like kind of have BioBlitzes be like a package of different things, like also doing something with like that Packers game or something that you said, coming up with City Challenge, like do something semi-football-y and like have some cheese and a cookie with a helmet on it, and also a brochure about the land trust right next to it. Things like that.
That is very Wisconsin.
I was going to say, challenge of BioBlitzes, particularly if your goal is to use iNaturalist, is that when I did my first one, and I had a part where I was going to help people who weren't familiar with iNaturalist download the app, figure out how to use it on their phone. You do run into, like, I was very used to using it, but I have an Android, and there are a bunch of people with iPhones, and it looks completely different on an iPhone. It functions somewhat differently. And so I really ran into not really being able to help the people with iPhones figure out. They just were kind of, I was like, I don't know, that doesn't look like anything I've seen before. So do your research, I guess, and maybe the next time I knew how to tell them how to do it on their iPhone. But I think you have to, like, I work a lot of times on the preserve with an older crowd. And so the technology does not come to me easily, or to them. And so there's a learning curve there and an uncomfortability that you have to help them get over. So what I do a lot of times is I go through the whole process of taking an observation on my phone and show them step by step and have them do that step by step. And then what's nice about that is, for a BioBlitz, once you've taught them how to use that tool, you can kind of like spread out and know that they're going to be able to record things without sort of an expert there to tick off the box and say, yes, what you saw was an eastern box turtle or whatever. So once you train them to use that, but it can be challenging if they're an older crowd or they just have a different kind of phone or tool than you're used to sort of have that little preparatory part at the beginning.
I was just looking around the iNaturalist website, and they have an educator's guide. We create our guides for our apps, and they have an educator's guide, which is really interesting. I'm sure you've seen it, but super helpful.
I do like guides for things.
Yeah, and I'll just double what Gina was saying. The average age of our master naturalists from the evaluations that we've done is about 55. And some of them do need to have a little bit more of a walkthrough for iNaturalist. And, you know, just the marketing and kind of getting people comfortable those are the biggest challenges, because setting up the BioBlitz is really easy. It's just making sure that people come and they're comfortable with the tool.
I did see a question from Matt about a night event with iNaturalist. I've not done anything like that yet, but Gina, it sounds like if you did with your Moth Week things, did you use iNaturalist for your Moth Week?
I did. However, my boss is an entomologist, a PhD entomologist, and so he set up black light, blue light, ultraviolet light stations on the preserve, and people came and did observations there. For what I did for myself personally was I just turned on my porch light every night for about an hour and went out and took pictures in the light, and I didn't have to worry because I don't know how well my camera does at nighttime. I don't feel like it takes very good pictures of natural items. So that might be something that either you want to set up a system where you've got good lighting, either to attract moths or some kind of lighting where you can take good pictures of them. But that's kind of how I handled it. I have not used iNaturalist a lot at night. And so I can't speak to that, but I think it could be challenging to get quality photos.
I haven't
Yep.
either, but I want one of those glow in the dark patches now, so the Land Trust might need to look into doing something with Moth Week in July for that reason, and of course other good conservation reasons. Griffin, were you saying something when I interrupted you?
No, you're good. But yeah, I would, with the Master Naturalists, we have used iNaturalist for mothing events. You just need a good headlamp or some other light source or a good flash on your camera, because again, you want to make sure that it's a good quality observation.
All right, last call for any comments or questions before we wrap it up for the day.
Just thank
All
you
right.
for
Question
inviting
for
us,
the
Paul.
audience.
Oh yeah, thank
Oh,
you.
sorry.
Yeah, thank you all for coming, and thank you all audience for attending. I'll be sending out this recording at some point later once it's all processed and saved, and probably putting it up on our YouTube channel, so it'll be available there as well. Feel free to send any follow-up questions if you have any other things you want to ask about, or if not, stay tuned for future iNaturalist events here with the Land Trust, or check out any of these folks if you happen to go to Minnesota, North Carolina, Tetons, or New York. All right, thank you all.